This is a map of the Toronto subway and streetcar system, and if you're thinking it looks pretty simple, you'd be right. After all, when you compare it to New York's map here, or even London's iconic underground system, Toronto looks like it's lagging behind. But that isn't necessarily true. Now, I'm not saying Toronto's subway system is more extensive than New York's or London's. After all, only the Yonge University line, the Bloor-Danforth line, and the Sheppard line are operational. The blue one here, formerly known as the Scarborough line, has been shut down permanently, and the silver and orange lines here and here will be under construction for a while. So basically act like they don't exist for now. With only these 3 subway lines, it would be unfair to compare Toronto to New York's subway system, which has 36 lines, 472 stations, and 24-hour service. Toronto would lose almost every round. But Toronto's transport magic isn't in its winding subway routes or hundreds of stations. It currently only has 75 stations. Yet this small system services Toronto's population of 2.9 million people and is considered the most efficient transit network in North America. Seriously, more efficient than Chicago or New York. Now, before you doubt that statement, to understand Toronto's brilliant yet burdened structure, let's look back at the map and focus on this U-shaped yellow line, known as the Yonge University line. It looks basic, but it's responsible for carrying 670,000 people every weekday from up here at the Vaughan Metropolitan Centre through the heavy movement of downtown Toronto to Finch, with trains running every 2 to 3 minutes. Compare that to Chicago, a city with a population of 2.6 million. Not too different from Toronto. The Red Line, Chicago's busiest line, has a weekday ridership of only 93,500. That means the Red Line only carries roughly 24 million users yearly. The Toronto Yellow Line multiplies that number by 7, carrying an insane 175 million people each year. Now, as the primary rapid rail system and the most heavily used in the entire country, this line would be overburdened if not for these red lines you see here. They represent the Toronto streetcar system, which is the largest streetcar system in the Americas, and yes, including South America and the United States. Whereas most cities have reduced streetcar use due to low ridership and poor maintenance as cars take the center stage, Toronto's streetcar system zigzags across the highest concentration of commuters down here in the city center, carrying 184,400 people every day, and over 60 million people each year. Compared to San Francisco's legendary street and cable car system that carries only 15,000 people each day, and just over 5 million each year, Toronto's red cars do some serious heavy lifting. And it does this with only 9 active lines too. By being directly connected to the stations along with the yellow line, commuters are able to hop off the subway and find a streetcar waiting to take them towards work and schooling areas along King Street, Queen Street, Dundas Square, and Union Station, where they can easily connect with the rest of the grid. At night, the same streetcar network shuffles commuters across downtown from 1:30 a.m. to 6 a.m., making up for the lack of 24-hour subway services. Let's look at it this way. The Toronto streetcar system alone carries more people every day than the full transit systems of cities like Cincinnati and Cleveland, combined. Even when you look at major metropolitan cities, you'd have to combine Los Angeles, Chicago, and Dallas's main transit system's ridership, and they still don't add up to Toronto's numbers. The truth is, Toronto streetcars do more than just boost the subway system. They literally pick up the slack when a subway line fails. And to keep the city moving, Toronto digs into one more resource: city buses. Despite the previous large numbers, Toronto's city bus system outshines them all as the most used public transit system in Toronto. With 192 operational routes, the TBS boasts a yearly ridership of over 279 million weekday passengers. By being directly integrated with the subway and streetcar systems, Toronto's buses act as a glue, holding the entire grid together. And when you add the Bloor-Danforth and Sheppard line, you get this: the Toronto Transit Commission, or TTC, public transit system. A lot more impressive than the first map, isn't it? In total, this system carries over 578 million people each year. And while it's not Tokyo or Amsterdam, it's a pretty great example of how public transit in North America should be. But if you're a Torontonian watching this, you're probably waiting for the ugly side to be told. And that leads me to my next part. Because despite all of these impressive numbers, Toronto's public transit system is far from perfect. Like, it can be downright terrible in some parts. From constant delays and 20-minute bus and streetcar wait times to fare increases and service cuts, not to mention the decade-old construction issues. It would be wrong to say that the TTC system doesn't have glaring flaws. It's kind of crazy how the system can be so bad and yet so efficient. But both are true, and it all starts with the city's biggest asset, which is also a major weakness: its subway lines. As efficient as they are, like I said earlier, there's only 3, increasing the strain on streetcars and buses. Heavily relying on the streetcar and bus system isn't exactly a good idea though. If these numbers are anything to go by, these systems are greatly overburdened. In 2022, 2/3 of the streetcar and bus riders reported being stuck in vehicles, struggling to navigate constant construction and old infrastructure to arrive at their stops. Only 14% of riders state that their buses or streetcars were on time, and there are several reasons why, with funding being one of the biggest. Terrible political decisions to slash the TTC's operational budget back in 1995 can still be felt today, as the system struggles to rely on passenger fares to run a grid in need of major upgrades. To put it simply, if ridership dips, so does funding. While cities like Tokyo, Chicago, New York, and Shanghai receive heavy government and state subsidies yearly to keep their transits functioning, the TTC lags desperately behind, with extra help coming directly from the city itself. There's a reason why New York's Metropolitan Transportation Authority, or MTA, is a well-oiled machine. The largest share of its revenue, which is a hefty $7.2 billion, comes from subsidies and dedicated taxes. The TTC did receive $2 billion in emergency subsidies during the health crisis in 2020 and 2021, but that was a one-off style bailout, with the federal government opting out of helping the TTC close the fare gap in 2022, or assist with emergency funding this year. Even when you compare the TTC to a city with less ridership like Los Angeles, the Toronto funding fails. Los Angeles receives a hefty $4 per rider, while Toronto, despite generating 10% of the nation's GDP, only receives 90 cents in subsidies for each of its 578 million riders. This can explain the recent 10% TTC fare hikes and service cuts to 39 routes, 36 of which are bus routes, 2 subway routes, and 1 streetcar route. This has left several commuters frustrated at overcrowding and increases to wait time along specific routes, most of which service shift-based workers and marginalized households during off-peak hours. All this does is push those with cars towards Toronto's extremely congested roads and bridges. Toronto recently earned the sad title of the 3rd most traffic-congested city in North America, with the average driver losing 5 days every year on the road. With a strained public transit, it's no surprise that 70% of Torontonians use their cars to commute, which is terrible. But it gets worse when you realize that Toronto's roads operate on a mixed service system, which means they share road space with the already burdened streetcars and buses. With plans for bus-only and streetcar-only lanes still in the experimental stages, you can't run away from downtown traffic by hopping into a bus or streetcar. This creates a situation where commuters are blocked by limited public transit services and crowded roads. This only gets worse when you consider the massive and time-consuming construction there is. Enter the Ontario Line project, the Eglinton Line, and the Scarborough Extension Line. These 3 projects are some of the biggest and most expensive undertakings from the TTC and Metrolinx, a transit agency of the Government of Ontario. Now let's look back at that first map, where I mentioned the permanent closure of Line 3, aka the Scarborough Line, here. Now, it wasn't closed just for the sake of it. It was old and extremely faulty, so the city saw an opportunity to start fresh with this. An extension of Line 2 that brings service 5 miles deeper into the Scarborough area, with 3 new stations. Sounds perfect, except for the wait time. The extension is estimated to open only in 2030. Seriously. Until then, an express bus line will run along the corridor. But this is nothing new. You see, Metrolinx is notorious for dragged-out completion schedules, and none shows this more than the Eglinton Crosstown Line project.
West and Eglinton Scarborough Crosstown LRT line will open in 2020.
It started in 2010 with the official groundbreaking in 2011, yet it's still not complete, having passed several due-by dates, including one in 2020 and 2023, and costing over $5 billion. As of now, there's no clear date, but 2024 is the current year being thrown around. Then there's the massive Ontario Line project, which has gone from a budget of $11 billion to $19 billion as the completion date was pushed from 2027 to 2031. Already residents are feeling the pinch, as the intersection between Queen and Yonge was closed this year for construction. This intersection here won't be opened for 5 years, a move which Metrolinx says will help speed up construction by 1 year, as opposed to closing it off in small sections. Now, this sounds like a logistical nightmare, and it is, with buses and streetcars picking up the slack yet again. But if it's pulled off, Toronto will be leaps and bounds ahead when it comes to public transit. The Ontario line alone will dramatically shift the state of subway transit by adding 10 miles and 15 new stations, running from Exhibition Place here through downtown to the Ontario Science Centre, cutting down the 70-minute transit time to under 30 minutes. This, with the Scarborough extension and Eglinton, if it's ever completed, will ease the burden on the Yellow Line, as well as the streetcar grid downtown. And we will have this, the 2031 TTC grid with new lines. It's starting to look like a case of going backwards to eventually and slowly move forwards. Is it ideal for the city now? Absolutely not. But it's the best possible future given the city's rapid population expansion and infrastructure needs. Though the glaring funding issue for transit repairs and upkeep is an uphill battle, Toronto's transport system still stands as a shining example of what the future of public transit in North America could and should be. Thank you for watching.